Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Aurora's Dream and watched the blue-green world of Velthara grow larger on the main screen. The planet looked peaceful with its vast oceans and floating crystal cities that sparkled like jewels in the sunlight. She had been captain of this research ship for 8 years, but this mission felt different and special. Today marked 15 years since humans first met the Kethrans, and their friendship had grown stronger with each passing year. Dr. Peter Blake walked up beside her and smiled as he looked at the planet. The xenobiologist had worked with Kethrans longer than almost any other human, and he understood their culture better than most. The Kethrans were gentle people who lived in harmony with their ocean world, and their technology was based on living crystals that could think and grow. They had shared so much knowledge with humanity and never asked for anything in return except friendship. The communication officer, Lisa Carter, turned from her station with excitement in her voice. She announced that the Kethran orbital station was sending welcome messages, and their old friend Zithka was waiting to greet them personally. Elena smiled because Zithka had been the first Kethran to learn human language, and he had spent years on Earth helping both species understand each other better. His webbed hands and crystalline patches on his amphibious skin made him look alien, but his kind eyes and gentle manner made him feel like family. The Aurora's Dream moved slowly toward the massive orbital station that hung above, Velthara like a living crystal garden. The station was made from the same biocrystal technology as the Kethran cities, and it pulsed with soft blue and green lights that showed it was alive and thinking. Hundreds of Kethran ships moved around the station like graceful fish swimming through space, and Elena always felt peaceful when she watched them move. Peter Blake checked his research equipment one more time because this mission was important for both species. They were going to study how Kethran crystal technology might help humans heal diseases that had troubled them for centuries. The Kethrans had offered to share this knowledge freely because they believed that all intelligent life should help each other survive and grow. Elena thought about how different the galaxy might be if all species shared the Kethran way of thinking. Lisa Carter suddenly straightened at her station and her face went pale as she listened to something on her headset. She turned to Elena with fear in her eyes and reported that long-range sensors were detecting massive ships approaching the system at high speed. The ships were too large to be Kethran vessels, and they were moving in military formation with weapons powered and ready for battle. Elena felt cold fear run down her spine as she realized what this might mean. The main screen changed to show space around Velthara, and Elena saw something that made her blood freeze. Dozens of huge dark ships were dropping out of hyperspace, and they were unlike anything she had ever seen before. The ships looked like metal insects with sharp edges and glowing red lights that pulsed like angry eyes. Elena recognized them from intelligence reports as Vorthak Empire dreadnoughts, and her heart started beating faster with terror. Peter Blake grabbed Elena's arm and pointed at the screen with shaking hands. The Vorthak ships were spreading out around Velthara in attack formation, and more ships kept appearing from hyperspace until the space around the planet was filled with metal death. Elena had read reports about the Vorthak Empire and their brutal expansion across the galaxy, but she never imagined they would attack peaceful Velthara. Lisa Carter was shouting into her headset trying to contact the Kethran orbital station, but the only response was static and interference. The Vorthak ships were jamming all communications and preventing any calls for help from reaching the rest of the galaxy. Elena watched in horror as the first Vorthak ships opened fire on the orbital station with weapons that turned metal and crystal into burning plasma. The beautiful living station that had welcomed so many visitors began to break apart under the terrible bombardment, and Elena could see small escape pods launching from the dying structure. Most of the pods were destroyed by Vorthak fighters before they could reach safety, and Elena realized that hundreds of Kethrans were dying while she watched helplessly. The peaceful people who had never hurt anyone were being slaughtered without mercy or reason. Peter Blake was crying as he watched the destruction because he had spent years living on that station and learning from the gentle scientists who worked there. Elena ordered Lisa Carter to prepare the Aurora's Dream for emergency departure because there was nothing their small research ship could do against the massive Vorthak fleet. She felt sick knowing they had to run while their friends were being murdered, but staying would only add human deaths to the tragedy. The Vorthak bombardment of Velthara began with weapons that Elena had only heard about in military briefings. Antimatter torpedoes struck the ocean world and turned vast areas of water into superheated steam that rose up like white walls of death. The beautiful crystal cities that had stood for thousands of years cracked and melted under the intense heat, and Elena watched an entire civilization dying in minutes. Lisa Carter managed to boost their sensors long enough to see the full scope of the attack, and what she discovered made Elena feel sick with horror. The Vorthak were not just attacking the planet, but they were systematically destroying every single structure and killing every living thing they could find. This was not conquest or invasion, but complete and total genocide of an entire species. The Aurora's dream shook as Vorthak fighters noticed the human ship and began firing warning shots to drive them away. Elena ordered full power to engines, and the research vessel accelerated toward the edge of the system, while explosions lit up space behind them. Peter Blake stood at the rear viewport and watched Velthera burn until the planet was just another dying star in the distance. As they escaped the system, Elena received one final transmission from the doomed planet, and it was Zithka sending a desperate message to all human ships. His voice was weak and filled with pain, but he managed to tell them that the Vorthak had attacked 12 Kethran colonies simultaneously, and every single one had been destroyed with no survivors. The gentle species that had been humanity's first and best friends in the galaxy was completely extinct. The last thing Zithkai said before the transmission ended was that the Vorthak had mentioned humans during their attack communications, and Elena realized with growing terror that Earth might be next on their list of worlds to destroy. Admiral Marcus Webb stood in the command center deep beneath Earth's surface and stared at the holographic display showing the destruction of Velthara. The images from the Aurora's dream had arrived 3 days ago, and every human leader had watched in horror as their closest alien friends were completely wiped out by the Vorthak Empire. Marcus had been a soldier for 30 years, but he had never seen anything as brutal and senseless as the genocide of an entire peaceful species. President Catherine Miller walked into the command center with her face set in grim determination. She had spent the last 3 days meeting with world leaders and military commanders from every nation on Earth, and they had all reached the same conclusion. Humanity could not let the murder of the Kethrans go unanswered, and they would not wait for the Vorthak to bring their genocide to Earth. For the first time in human history, every nation on the planet was united with a single purpose. Dr. Peter Blake had been working without sleep since his return from Velthera, and his discovery had changed everything. The Kethrans had managed to transmit their entire technological database to human servers, just moments before their civilization ended forever. The dying species had given humanity the gift of their knowledge with their final breath, and Peter was determined to use it to honor their memory and protect other innocent species. The Kethran crystal technology was unlike anything humans had ever imagined, and it worked by growing living computers that could think and adapt to any situation. Peter had already begun combining this technology with human engineering, and the results were beyond anything they had dreamed possible. The crystal systems could amplify human weapons and shields while providing computing power that made their best supercomputers look like simple calculators. Colonel Jake Sullivan entered the command center, carrying a thick folder marked with the highest security classification. Inside were the plans for something called the Tempest Protocol, and it represented humanity's transformation from a peaceful exploration species into something the galaxy had never seen before. Every human colony world was being converted into a military production center, and every citizen was being trained for the coming war. The protocol was designed around human strengths that other species did not fully understand, and Jake had spent years studying what made humanity unique in the galaxy. Humans could coordinate complex operations across vast distances while adapting their tactics in real time based on changing conditions. They could also maintain perfect fighting efficiency, even when driven by powerful emotions like grief and anger. Commander Sarah Phillips was overseeing the construction of humanity's first true warship in the orbital shipyards above Earth. The vessel was called the Retribution, and it incorporated Kethran crystal technology with human weapons designed to create something that had never existed before. The ship was not just a machine, but a living extension of human will powered by grief for their murdered friends. Sarah had worked with Kethran engineers for years, and she understood how their biocrystal systems could be adapted for warfare. The crystals could grow new weapon configurations during battle and repair damage faster than any normal technology. Combined with human tactical thinking and engineering skill, the result was a warship that could evolve and adapt to any enemy it faced. Marcus Webb studied the intelligence reports about Vorthak military capabilities and realized that their strength came from overwhelming force and brutal efficiency, rather than tactical innovation. The insectoid species had conquered dozens of civilizations by using massive fleets to crush any resistance before it could organize. They had never faced an enemy that could match their coordination while exceeding their adaptability. The communication networks linking human worlds were being upgraded with quantum entanglement systems that would allow instantaneous coordination across any distance. This meant that human fleets could operate as a single organism, even when spread across multiple star systems, and they could share tactical information faster than any enemy could react. The Vorthak would face something they had never encountered before. President Miller addressed the United Earth government, and her words were broadcast to every human colony world simultaneously. She declared that humanity would not rest until the Vorthak Empire was completely destroyed, and every species they had oppressed was free to live in peace. The death of the Kethrans would be avenged and no other innocent. Civilization would suffer the same fate. The president also announced the creation of the Liberation Fleet, which would carry human justice to every corner of the galaxy. This would not be a war of conquest, but a crusade to free the oppressed and punish those who preyed on the innocent. Humanity was taking on the responsibility of protecting species that could not protect themselves. Dr. Blake made another discovery that filled him with both excitement and sadness. The Kethran database contained detailed information about every species the Vorthak had conquered or destroyed over the past century. There were dozens of civilizations that had been enslaved or exterminated, and many more that lived in constant fear of Vorthak expansion. Humanity now had a complete map of injustice that needed to be corrected. Colonel Sullivan began training the first generation of human soldiers who would fight in space, battles using tactics no other species had ever developed. These warriors were taught to think like a pack while maintaining individual creativity, and they learned to use grief and anger as tools rather than weaknesses. The Vorthak would face enemies who fought with both perfect discipline and burning passion. The retribution was nearing completion, and Commander Phillips ran the final tests on its revolutionary weapon systems. The ship could reconfigure its entire armament during battle, and its crystal-enhanced shields could absorb enemy fire and convert it into additional power for weapons. The vessel was designed to fight against impossible odds and emerge victorious through superior adaptation. Marcus Webb received reports from human intelligence operatives who had infiltrated Vorthak territory, and what they discovered confirmed his worst fears. The Empire was already preparing for their next conquest, and Earth was indeed their primary target. The Vorthak believed that humans were weak because they formed emotional attachments to other species instead of simply dominating them. The aliens had no understanding of what they had truly awakened when they murdered the Kethrans. Humanity's capacity for friendship was matched only by their capacity for vengeance, and the Vorthak would learn that destroying human allies was the worst mistake any species could make. The storm that was coming would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Retribution and felt the power of the great warship humming through the deck beneath her feet. 6 months had passed since the destruction of Velthara, and humanity had used every moment to prepare for this day. The ship around her was no longer the peaceful research vessel she had once commanded, but something far more dangerous and beautiful. Every system incorporated Kethran crystal technology that made the vessel almost alive. The Retribution hung in space at the edge of human territory, with 5 escort ships waiting for the enemy to arrive. Admiral Webb had positioned this small fleet exactly where Vorthak scouts would encounter them first, and Elena knew that today would determine whether humanity could truly challenge the Empire that had murdered their friends. The quantum communication systems linked her ship to every human vessel in the galaxy. Lieutenant Daniel Murphy monitored the tactical systems and reported that long-range sensors were detecting a large Vorthak fleet approaching their position. The enemy ships moved in the same insectoid formation they had used to destroy Velthara, and Elena felt cold anger fill her heart as she remembered watching her friends die. Today the Kethrans would have their justice. and the galaxy would see that humanity was no longer a species to be underestimated. Dr. Peter Blake worked at a science station that had been modified to provide real-time analysis of enemy weaknesses during battle. His knowledge of Kethran technology combined with captured Vorthak intelligence had revealed flaws in their armor and shield systems that no other species had ever discovered. The living crystals could adapt their analysis faster than any conventional computer and find new vulnerabilities as the battle progressed. The Vorthak scouting fleet consisted of 20 heavy cruisers and support vessels commanded by a war master who had never lost a battle in 30 years of conquest. The alien commander was confident that these few human ships would surrender or be destroyed within minutes just like every other species they had encountered. The insects had no concept of what awaited them in the cold darkness of space. Elena watched the enemy ships approach and felt the Retribution's crystal systems responding to her emotional state. The biocrystals had been programmed to enhance human cognitive abilities during combat, and she could feel her awareness expanding to encompass every detail of the approaching battle. Her connection to the ship was so complete that the vessel had become an extension of her will and determination. The Vorthak fleet opened communications and demanded immediate surrender using the same arrogant tone they had used with countless other species. Elena's response was simple and direct as she told them that humanity did not surrender to murderers and that justice for the Kethrans would be delivered today. The enemy commander seemed amused by human defiance and ordered his ships to destroy the small human fleet. Lieutenant Murphy activated the quantum coordination systems, and suddenly all 6 human ships began moving with perfect synchronization that defied everything the Vorthak knew about space warfare. The vessels danced through space like parts of a single living organism, while their crystal-enhanced weapons charged with power that made the stars seem dim. The enemy had never faced coordination like this before. The first exchange of fire lasted only seconds, but the results shocked the Vorthak fleet into confused silence. Human weapons punched through their advanced armor like it was made of paper, while their own devastating firepower was absorbed by crystal shields that seemed to grow stronger under bombardment. 3 Vorthak cruisers were destroyed instantly, while the human ships emerged without a single scratch. Dr. Blake analyzed the enemy response patterns and discovered that Vorthak tactics relied on overwhelming firepower rather than adaptability. The crystal computers were already calculating new attack vectors that would exploit this weakness, and Elena felt the knowledge flowing directly into her consciousness. The living technology allowed her to think faster and see farther than any normal human could manage. The Vorthak War Master ordered his remaining ships to concentrate their fire on the Retribution, but Elena had anticipated this response. The human fleet split into 3 groups that attacked from different angles while maintaining perfect coordination through their quantum communication network. Each ship knew exactly what the others were doing and could adapt their tactics instantly as conditions changed. Commander Sarah Phillips monitored the weapon systems as they reconfigured themselves during the battle. The crystal technology allowed the ship to grow new gun configurations that were perfectly designed to exploit specific enemy weaknesses. What had started as standard plasma cannons transformed into focused antimatter beams that could cut through any known armor in seconds. The immediate battle turned into a demonstration of human capabilities that terrified the surviving Vorthak crews. The enemy ships found themselves fighting an opponent that seemed to predict their every move, while adapting new countermeasures faster than they could implement new attacks. Every Vorthak advantage was neutralized by human innovation enhanced with Kethran wisdom. Elena felt the grief and anger of every human in the fleet flowing through the quantum network, and she channeled these emotions into cold tactical precision. The Vorthak had killed innocent friends, and now they would learn what happened when humanity was pushed beyond the breaking point. The galaxy was about to discover that humans were the most dangerous species when fighting for justice. Lieutenant Murphy coordinated the final assault with mathematical precision that would have been impossible without crystal enhancement. The remaining Vorthak ships were surrounded and destroyed one by one, while their desperate calls for help were jammed by human electronic warfare systems. No word of this battle would reach the Empire until it was far too late. Dr. Blake recorded every detail of Vorthak technology and tactics during the destruction of their fleet. The crystal computers were learning and adapting with each enemy ship they analyzed, and this knowledge would be shared instantly with every human vessel in the galaxy. The Empire's military secrets were being stripped away and turned against them. The last Vorthak ship tried to escape, but Elena would not allow any survivors to warn their Empire about humanity's new capabilities. The Retribution pursued the fleeing vessel and destroyed it with a single shot that turned metal and flesh into expanding plasma. The message was clear, but no one was left alive to deliver it. As the battle ended, Elena stood among the wreckage of 20 Vorthak warships and felt a grim satisfaction that justice had been served. The enemy had expected to crush a few primitive human vessels, but instead they had encountered something unprecedented in galactic history. Humanity had transformed grief into a weapon that could destroy any enemy. The quantum communication network carried news of the victory to every human world simultaneously, and celebration mixed with determination, as people realized that their species could actually defeat the mighty Vorthak Empire. This was only the beginning of a war that would reshape the galaxy and free every oppressed species from tyranny. Admiral Marcus Webb stood before the largest gathering of human military commanders in history and announced the beginning of Operation Shattered Chains. The massive holographic display behind him showed every Vorthak-controlled system in the galaxy, and each red dot represented millions of oppressed beings waiting for liberation. News of humanity's victory over the Vorthak scouting fleet had spread across space faster than anyone expected, and enslaved species everywhere were beginning to hope. The liberation campaign would be unlike any military operation in galactic history because humans were not fighting to conquer territory but to free the innocent and punish the guilty. Every human fleet would carry liberation forces trained to help freed species rebuild their worlds, while human engineers would restore the infrastructure destroyed by Vorthak occupation. This was warfare with a conscience guided by the memory of murdered friends. Captain Nancy Foster prepared her ground forces for the assault on Zephyr Prime, where thousands of Kalani refugees had been enslaved in mining operations for over 20 years. The reptilian Kalani had been peaceful traders before the Vorthak conquered their worlds and forced them into brutal labor camps that killed hundreds every month. Nancy had studied their culture and language, so she could communicate with survivors and help them rebuild their shattered civilization. The human fleet approaching Zephyr Prime consisted of 12 ships, including the Retribution, and 2 other crystal-enhanced vessels that could adapt their weapon systems during battle. Commander Sarah Phillips had designed new landing craft that could punch through any planetary defense while protecting the troops inside from the most devastating weapons the Vorthak could deploy. Every piece of equipment incorporated lessons learned from Kethryn. Technology. Major Ryan Clark led the first wave of human soldiers who landed on Zephyr Prime under cover of orbital bombardment that precisely targeted Vorthak military installations while avoiding areas where slaves were held. The crystal-enhanced targeting systems could distinguish between enemy combatants and innocent prisoners with accuracy that amazed even the humans using them. No liberation would be won at the cost of those being liberated. The Vorthak garrison on Zephyr Prime had never faced an enemy like humanity, and their defensive tactics crumbled under the coordinated assault. Human soldiers moved through the mining complexes with perfect coordination, while their advanced weapons cut through enemy armor and fortifications. The insectoid defenders found themselves fighting opponents who seemed to anticipate their every move. Ryan Clark reached the first slave compound and saw conditions that filled him with cold rage. Thousands of Kalani prisoners were barely alive after years of starvation and brutal treatment, while Vorthak guards had been using them for entertainment as well as labor. The human major made a promise to himself that every single Vorthak on this world would pay for what they had done to innocent people. The liberated Kalani could hardly believe that. Someone had finally come to rescue them, and many collapsed from relief when they realized their nightmare was ending. Nancy Foster worked with her medical teams to provide immediate care, while human engineers began dismantling the slave compounds and building proper housing for the survivors. Every action was designed to restore dignity to people who had been treated as animals. News of the liberation of Zephyr Prime spread through the galactic communication networks and reached species that had been living in fear of Vorthak expansion for decades. The Andorian Council sent secret messages to human commanders, offering intelligence about Vorthak military positions, while the Thessian Republic began organizing resistance movements on occupied worlds. Humanity had sparked a galaxy-wide rebellion against tyranny. Dr. Peter Blake analyzed captured Vorthak technology and discovered that their military strength was built on fear rather than innovation. The Empire had relied on overwhelming force and brutal tactics for so long that they had stopped developing new weapons or defensive systems. Human crystal-enhanced technology was already generations ahead of anything the Vorthak possessed. Elena Rodriguez led the assault on the Vorthak fortress, world of Grimhold, where the Empire stored weapons and supplies for their expansion fleets. The planet was defended by massive orbital platforms and a fleet of heavy battleships. But human tactical superiority turned these advantages into weaknesses. The quantum coordination networks allowed human ships to attack from multiple directions while sharing, targeting data instantly. The battle for Grimhold lasted 6 hours and ended with the complete destruction of the Vorthak defense fleet. Human marines stormed the orbital platforms while ground forces captured the weapon manufacturing facilities intact. Every piece of captured technology was analyzed and its secrets shared with the growing alliance of liberated species who were beginning to fight alongside their human rescuers. Lieutenant Daniel Murphy discovered that Vorthak communication networks were vulnerable to crystal-enhanced electronic warfare, and he began disrupting their ability to coordinate defensive operations across multiple systems. Enemy fleets found themselves cut off from central command, while human forces struck deep into their territory with surgical precision. The Empire was being dismantled piece by piece. Major Clark trained liberated Kalani warriors in human combat tactics and was amazed by how quickly they adapted to coordinated warfare. The reptilian species had never been soldiers, but their desire for justice transformed them into effective fighters who could support human operations while protecting their own people. The galaxy was learning that freedom was worth fighting, for Commander Phillips developed new ship designs that incorporated technology from multiple liberated species while maintaining the crystal enhancement systems that gave humanity its edge. These hybrid vessels combined the best features of different civilizations and created a truly galactic fleet that represented unity against oppression. The Vorthak faced enemies who grew stronger with each victory. The liberation of Kepler Station demonstrated human commitment to saving every innocent life regardless of species. The massive space habitat held over 1 million prisoners from dozens of different worlds, and the Vorthak had rigged it with explosives to prevent rescue attempts. Human engineers used crystal computers to safely disarm every bomb while Marines eliminated the guards without damaging the delicate life support systems. Admiral Webb received reports that Vorthak military commanders were beginning to panic as their empire crumbled under sustained human assault. Several frontier governors had attempted to negotiate separate peace treaties, while others had simply abandoned their posts and fled toward the core worlds. The insects had never faced an enemy that could not be intimidated or bribed into submission. The freed species began forming their own military units trained and equipped by human advisors who taught them everything they had learned about fighting the Vorthak Empire. These liberation armies grew larger with each rescued world, and soon human forces were supported by warriors from dozens of different civilizations who all shared the same goal of preventing future oppression. Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Retribution and watched another Vorthak fleet retreat in disorder after losing half their ships to human tactical superiority. The galaxy was changing, and species that had lived in fear for generations were beginning to believe that justice was possible. The storm that humanity had unleashed was sweeping away centuries of tyranny and replacing it with hope. Admiral Marcus Webb stood on the command deck of the massive dreadnought Justice and stared at the red-brown world of Vorthak Prime, hanging in space before the largest human fleet ever assembled. 2 years had passed since the Liberation Campaign began, and now every surviving Vorthak ship was gathered around their homeworld for a final desperate defense. The insectoid empire that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries was about to face judgment for their crimes. The Justice was 3 times larger than any previous human vessel, and its crystal-enhanced systems incorporated technology from dozens of liberated species who had contributed to this final weapon of justice. The ship represented the unity of all free peoples in the galaxy, and its mission was to ensure that no other civilization would ever suffer the fate of the peaceful Kethrans. Every system hummed with purpose and determination. Captain Elena Rodriguez commanded the Retribution as part of the assault fleet, and felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. The woman who had witnessed the murder of humanity's first alien friends would now deliver the final blow against those responsible for that terrible crime. The bridge around her was filled with officers from multiple species who had all lost loved ones to Vorthak brutality. Dr. Peter Blake worked with scientists from the liberated worlds to analyze the massive defensive installations that surrounded Vorthak Prime. The enemy had built orbital fortresses and weapon platforms that could destroy entire fleets, but crystal-enhanced. Computers were finding weaknesses in their design that could be exploited by coordinated assault. The same technology that had saved the Kethrin database would now help destroy their murderers. The Vorthak High Command sent a final communication offering to negotiate surrender terms, but Admiral Webb's response was swift and absolute. There would be no mercy for a species that had shown none to their victims, and no negotiation with those who had committed genocide against innocent peoples. The only acceptable outcome was the complete dismantling of their military power and government. Lieutenant Daniel Murphy coordinated the opening bombardment as thousands of human and allied ships opened fire simultaneously on the orbital defenses around Vorthak Prime. The quantum communication networks allowed perfect timing that overwhelmed enemy shields through concentrated firepower, while crystal-enhanced targeting systems ensured that every shot found its mark with devastating precision. The battle for Vorthak Prime became the largest space engagement in galactic history, as both sides committed every available ship to the final confrontation. Human tactical superiority was tested against Vorthak desperation, as the insectoid species fought with the fury of a cornered predator. Explosions lit up space like new stars being born and dying in moments. Major Ryan Clark led ground forces in the assault on the planetary defense centers, while liberated Kalani and Andorian warriors fought alongside human marines with a coordination that amazed veteran military observers. The alliance that humanity had built through liberation was stronger than any empire based on fear and oppression. Free peoples fought harder than slaves ever could. Commander Sarah Phillips watched the Justice's main weapon systems reconfigure themselves as the crystal technology adapted to counter new Vorthak defensive measures. The living computers were learning and evolving faster than any enemy could adapt, and each exchange of fire left human forces stronger, while their opponents grew weaker. Innovation was defeating stagnation in the most dramatic way possible. The Vorthak planetary shields began failing under sustained bombardment from weapons that incorporated the best technology from across the galaxy. Human engineering combined with Kethrin crystals and enhanced by innovations from dozens of other species created firepower that no single civilization could have developed alone. Unity was proving stronger than any individual strength. Dr. Blake discovered that the Vorthak had been using slave labor to maintain their most critical systems, and many of these enslaved engineers were secretly sabotaging their captors' equipment. Messages of support reached human forces from within Vorthak installations as oppressed peoples rose up to help their liberators. The empire was crumbling from within as well as without. Elena Rodriguez led the final assault on the Vorthak command fortress and fought her way through corridors filled with desperate defenders who knew their empire was ending. The woman who had once been a peaceful scientist had become a warrior seeking justice for murdered friends, and she would not be denied her goal. Every step brought her closer to avenging the gentle Kethrins. The Vorthak military leadership was captured alive and brought before a tribunal representing every species they had oppressed during their reign of terror. The insects who had once believed themselves superior to all other life forms found themselves judged by the very peoples they had enslaved and murdered. Justice was finally being served after centuries of cruelty. Admiral Webb oversaw the systematic dismantling of Vorthak military installations, while carefully preserving civilian areas and infrastructure needed by the surviving population. This was not revenge, but justice, and humanity would not become monsters to defeat monsters. The insectoid civilians would be given the chance to build a better society without their military caste. The liberation forces established a new government on Vorthak Prime that included representatives from all the species the Empire had oppressed, and this council would oversee the transformation of the former military state into something that could contribute positively to galactic civilization. Former slaves would help their former masters learn how to live in peace. Major Clark trained new peacekeeping forces drawn from multiple species who would ensure that no future military buildup could threaten galactic stability. These warriors understood that freedom required constant vigilance, and they were prepared to fight again if any new empire tried to repeat the Vorthak's crimes against innocent peoples. Lieutenant Murphy helped establish communication networks that linked every liberated world and created the foundation for a true galactic alliance based on mutual cooperation rather than domination. The quantum entanglement systems that had given humanity its tactical advantage would now be used to maintain peace and prevent future conflicts. Dr. Blake worked with scientists from across the galaxy to create memorial databases that would preserve the memory of every species destroyed by the Vorthak Empire. The peaceful Kethrans would never be forgotten, and their sacrifice would inspire future generations to choose cooperation over conquest. Knowledge and friendship would be their greatest monuments. The final ceremony took place on New Velthara, a world terraformed to recreate the lost Kethran homeworld as a living memorial to humanity's first alien friends. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to witness the establishment of the Galactic Liberation Alliance with humanity as its founding guardian. The storm had ended and a new age of peace had begun. Elena Rodriguez stood in the crystal gardens that recreated the beauty of the original Veltara and felt the presence of her old friend Zith Ka in every sparkling formation. The gentle amphibian, who had taught humanity about friendship across species barriers, would have been proud to see how his sacrifice had led to freedom for countless worlds. His people had not died in vain. As the ceremony concluded with representatives from across the galaxy pledging to defend freedom and justice, Admiral Webb reflected on how humanity had found its purpose among the stars. They were not conquerors or explorers, but protectors of the innocent and guardians of peace. When the galaxy needed heroes, humanity had answered with a storm that swept away darkness and brought light to every corner of space.